Kha B-Nisan hawe briche elauchon. Happy New Year, everybody. A new year in April 1st. That's it. So today, I thought I'd just share with you guys a couple notes on Assyrian New Year, which is celebrated on April 1st. And I'm not doing an expansive video on the topic yet, um, perhaps if there's enough interest in it, but just to give you a couple thoughts on some of the ancient connections that Assyrian New Year or Kha B-Nisan has with its ancient Mesopotamian past. So sometimes people may refer to Kha B-Nisan, which is the first of Nisan or April 1st, as the Assyrian New Year. They may refer to it as Akito, and Akito is an ancient word that describes the New Year's festal celebration. So before we get into that and sort of what that word means, let's talk a little bit about the dating of it. Because it's celebrated at the beginning of the month of Nisan, we're celebrating it April 1st. Now, Nisan usually happens at the spring equinox. So, that's, toward the end of March, around March 21st or so, is usually when that happens. And over time, the calendar was standardized, right? So Nisan came to be associated with April. And so now the first of Nisan is celebrated on April 1st, according to the common calendar. Now, originally, this tradition goes back to, I mean, we're talking maybe 5,000 years, how old this thing goes. Yes, it's true. It's probably not the same today as it was back then. But one thing that's interesting about it, this Akito, is that it's a continuing celebration and it changes through time. And in fact, the first instances of this festival happened twice a year, first in Nisan and also in Tashrito, another month of the ancient calendar. And they're attested by the Sumerian culture prior to being performed by the Akkadian speaking cultures of Mesopotamia, be they in Babylon or Assyria, basically the different powers of the power centers of Mesopotamia. So, what does the word even mean? Well, to write the word Akito in Sumerian, you're probably going to say Akiti or something like this. And when it's written in the Babylonian version of Akkadian, they'll say Akitum. So Akita was celebrated in its earliest form as a harvest festival, first in the spring during Nisan to commemorate the harvest of grain, and then later at Tashritu to commemorate the harvest of wheat. Now, if you think about the different Akkadian characters, and really these are Sumerian characters actually that Akkadian adopts. My Akkadian's better than my Sumerian, so forgive me for that. But if we think about the characters in which the word Akito is written, going back to ancient Sumerian, they're composed basically of characters that mean an arm or labor, right? Power can be associated with one's arm. And then the ground, the earth, the land, right? So basically working the ground. So the celebration was an agrarian one in its original form. And that form was more rural, but as the cultures of Mesopotamia grew, remember I said 5,000 years ago, that's a long time, right? And so in that time, the cultures of the region grow. And so when I say cultures, I mean like the Sumerians and then the Akkadian speaking peoples, whether they're at Akkad or Babylon, Assyria, etc. They become more urban over time. And so what ends up happening is that people who relocate to these urban centers bring their celebrations with them. And eventually, and remember, this is a long time period, but eventually what was once a rural agricultural festival becomes something of an annual festival. And it goes from being celebrated twice a year to once a year. And that's during the spring. That's why we're celebrating it on the Kha B-Nisan. Well, eventually, this is associated with the different power structures and political apparatus. In fact, what we know about Akito mostly comes from the Babylonian version, where it's highly nationalistic and political. And it's because, it's a way in which to reaffirm the people and their king inside of the gods, right? And so you'll have different events over a 12-day period, at least this is the Babylonian version. And in that time period, we have basically Marduk rising as the leader of all the gods and affirming the leadership of the Babylonian king among the people. So those are some of the general ideas. If you've ever heard of the Enuma Elish, which is an ancient poem or play or ritual or myth, all of those apply, actually. This was performed during this time period, right? And so it has a lot to do with Marduk. He's the god of Babylon, his combat with Tiamat, the deep, the goddess of the deep, the Kraken, so to speak. And so it becomes very political. Now, yes, there are local versions, and you can read about different Akito celebrations all the way north in Assyria and other locales that happen over time. But eventually, the Akkadian powers recede around 612 BC into 515 and BC. And what ends up happening is eventually the Persian Empire comes to control Mesopotamia. So, of course, this is after, centuries of inner strife between the different Akkadian-speaking powers, the Assyrians, Babylonians. But when the Persians come in, it changes how a celebration like this would be performed. But in spite of that, there's evidence of the Akito festival being celebrated in its ancient form until about the 3rd century, the Common Era, and that's during the Seleucid period, for those of you familiar with history. Still, the political apparatus is different, right? It's not something local. It's not, one of the indigenous Mesopotamian customs. It's a foreign culture, a Persian culture that comes to dominate Mesopotamia. But what's interesting is that the Persians really adapt and almost fuse with Mesopotamian culture in a lot of ways. There's a similar celebration, Nowruz, in the Persian tradition, which just means the new day, the new Ruz, right? The new day. And so what is likely to have happened is that these celebrations either fused in different ways with Nowruz. They were superseded by the Assyrian community becoming Christian. So this falls around the same time as Holy Week and the Feast of the Resurrection, or what people call Easter in the West. And there's different local harvest customs that persist over time. And there's a number of Assyrian scholars who've dealt with the continuity and can better speak to it. Anyone watching, please chime in the comments and, let us all what you've learned, or if you're one of them who's researched this area, I'd be interested in learning more about the continuity of that too. All that to say, in the present day, the Akito celebration or the Kha B-Nisan celebration, the New Year's festival, is kind of like a mix between, if you're an American, this is easy to connect with, but some other cultures, maybe you have a better day, but it's like the 4th of July, right? Where it's a nationalistic culture, people barbecue. So it is like a barbecue, but it's not like a 4th of July barbecue. It's more like a tailgate, right? Like it's, it's good food. And then there's a lot of music, right? Tailgate style, but it's more like a New Year's party, in terms of the celebration of it than, something like a tailgate. And tailgates can be fun, of course, but, not to the extent that we may see on a New Year's Eve here in the West. And look, if you got to pick a New Year's Eve to celebrate, forget December 31st. I mean, who wants to see a bunch of balls drop? That's not interesting to me. Kha B-Nisan is a much better New Year's celebration than what we do here, where, I don't know. I mean, look, some people like New Year's Eve. They like the fireworks. Here, people they have a good time. And it's a good time to have a good time. So Kha B-Nisan all the way. So you learned a word today in Syriac, Aramaic, or Assyrian, Kha B-Nisan, which means the first of Nisan, which we calibrate now to April. Okay. And you also learned a word in Akkadian, even going back to Sumerian, called Akito. And Akito, Akiti in Sumerian, just basically refers to the work of the land, or working the land, the fruits of the labor of the land, right? And so that's the idea behind it. And it came to be associated with this month that we, now pair with Nisan. So we learned a couple things, and, I hope you appreciate the ancient connections to this culture that's still alive today. And if you have any Assyrian friends, wish them a Kha B-Nisan bricha. Go ahead and, send them your New Year's greetings.